Welcome back to the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. As we completed our last program, we were talking about the fourth beast and how this fourth beast of Daniel would be unlike the others because of the way that it would morph into something different and not just tread on a portion of the world, but the entire world. And this is the result of Imperial Rome, that great savage beast that subjugated so many, including their horrific treatment of God's people, attacking the province of Judea not once, not twice, but 3 times, and hauling all Jews off into diaspora, renaming the land of Judea Philistia that still haunts Jews to this day, and crucifying so many. That following that presentation, we are now introduced to horns. Now, while the beasts are empires and institutions, the horns are people. They're blowhards. They're boneheaded individuals that lead nations today, and they are the ones who form a confederacy. I call it the Big Ten Conference, that are going to support Trumpus Maximus, the man who is the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan, a demon-possessed politician who is going to betray Israel and the world. The 10 horns are cast in a very troublesome situation. They are characters menacing Israel today, and it's only going to get worse. It reads, 10 horns, which are bone-headed blowhards, from this powerful dominion, from the extent of Eastern Orthodox and Roman Christianity, are going to be 10 government leaders, and they will arise. And another individual, so an 11th person all total, will rise up and take his stand at the end along with them. And he himself will be different as he changes, transforming himself from the first in this series. So then, 3 political leaders of nations will be humiliated and humbled, losing status relative to the others by being put down. Daniel 7:24. All right, in this prophecy, what we are witnessing is that out of the realm that was subjugated and influenced by either the Eastern Orthodox Church or the Roman Catholic Church, that there will be 10 heads of state over 10 nations that will arise in the end. And that those 10 heads of state will empower and enable another. And the other will be a transformative figure in his own, so that he is different than what he once appeared to be. What we're talking about here is the 10 nations, which I will delineate in a moment, who will support Donald Trump, who is hugely different from Trump 45 to Trump 47, as the confabulation of demon possession has taken hold. And it then says that 3 of the 10 will be humiliated and humbled, their status reduced relative to the others, because the thing that Trump does best is turn on allies and demean them. It is one of his most prevailing traits. It is one of his most disgusting traits, but that trait was picked up in this testimony. So here we find a couple of things that are really defining of Donald Trump, that he has changed from Trump 45 to Trump 47, with Trump 47, 47th president of the United States, being demon possessed and being a mad, insane confabulator. And also that while he will form a power base of 10 nations, of 10 heads of state, that he will turn on a third of them and demean them. So in the end, we're going to expect 10 boneheaded blowhards that are going to arise from nations influenced at one time by Roman or Orthodox churches to menace Jews and exterminate Israel. Recognizing that Donald Trump of the United States is Satan's most special stooge, the type that he most likes to use in this regard and possess, we can now reconsider the names of the most likely to league with him, and I've shared this in previous programs, and especially their advocacy of imposing the two-state solution. This time I'm going to lead with Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. He is the man who has invested the most money in bribing Donald Trump. Second unto him in terms of bribes of Donald Trump and his influence in the West in imposing Islamic both terrorism and control of the media, of academia by Islamic finance. The Bank of Islamic Terror is Tamim bin al-Thani, the owner of Qatar. These men, in turn, own Donald Trump, having invested tens of billions of dollars in their prize. While I've already addressed Saudi Arabia's 1.3 million Roman Catholics to validate the church's influence, and that is probably a surprising number to you. 1.3 million Roman Catholics live in Saudi Arabia. There is considerable archaeological evidence of countless Byzantine churches and monasteries across the peninsula, with Christianity deeply rooted in the northwest along the Tigris and Euphrates, down to the Persian Gulf, and especially in Qatar. 15% of the population has survived as Christians with the onslaught of Islam, which is shocking. The church arrived in the 3rd century CE with the area known as Beth Qattare, the House of Qatar, being a significant center for the early Christian church. After these two, and rounding out Trump's partners in crime against Israel, I would add Emmanuel Macron of France, Keir Starmer of the UK, Friedrich Merz of Germany. I think they are assured. The next three on my list would be Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Mark Carney of Canada, and Recep Erdogan of Turkey. This brings the total to 8. And should you think, well, you can't include Giorgia Meloni and Keir Starmer in that list because they haven't absolutely sworn that they're going to establish a Palestinian state. Well, Keir Starmer said he's going to do so unless Israel has formed a peace treaty with Hamas, which is impossible, prior to September. And Giorgia Meloni says, I absolutely am committed to a Palestinian state. I just don't want to vote for one until there is a Palestinian state. All of them are devoted to rewarding the Islamic terrorists who perpetrated 10/7. And none more so than Erdogan, Thani, and MBS. So this brings the total to 8. Now, since this confab of crazies will continue to promote the imposition of an Islamic state carved out of Israel, there is certainly the possibility that Abdel el-Sisi of Egypt will be on that list because he is being courted now by Russia, and Trump will do everything he can to keep him under the fold. And also Pope Leo, who can't stand Trump, but nonetheless, as an American Pope and as a pro-Palestinian, even though there's no such thing as a Palestinian, that's never bothered the church before. There's no such thing as a Jesus Christ, and yet they continue with that myth as well. So there is absolutely the possibility that the 10th player will be Pope Leo the 14th. And this time, since it does not specify that the worst of them as the adversary's advocate will be in, this time it says specifically he's going to be an addition to these 10, we should be expecting 11 boneheads in the Lunatics League all total. Now, should we be looking for potential substitutions, say for El-Sisi or Pope Leo, I'm still bullish on the possibility of the handsome fighter with a strong past, the leader of ISIS who converted from Al-Qaeda, Ahmed al-Shara of Syria. He is known better as al-Jolani. And then there is also one of the men that has invested heavily in Donald Trump and has Donald Trump's ear, Mohammed bin al-Nahyan of the United Arab Emirates, with Trump's advocation on behalf of al-Jolani's Islamic State and recognizing the UAE has made substantial contributions to owning POTUS. These are very real potential candidates. And while Trump has a decent relationship with Hungary's Viktor Orban, he seems way too pro-Israel to fit this mold. And while we're on this subject, due to the likelihood that BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, although it really should be BRICS now with the addition of Iran and other nations, they are going to continue to prevail over the G7 economically. So I do not think that Trump's ego would handle a BRICS member as part of his 10-nation confab, which obviously eliminates Xi, Putin, Modi, or Lula from the list, as they hail from China, Russia, India, and Brazil. They are all way too anti-Trump at this point. Therefore, there are 12 that I've given you in the list to scavenge 10. MBS, Althani, Macron, Starmer, Mertz, Maloney, Carney, I should say, Erdogan, Sisi, Pope Leo, al-Shara, and al-Nahyan from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, France, UK, Germany, Italy, Canada, Turkey, Egypt, the RCC, Syria, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, as we watch Trump's emerging confab to destroy Israel at the UN through the establishment of a Fakistinian state, this list will, of course, solidify, and it will begin to solidify as early as September of this year, just a month from now. And it may even add a surprising name. I would not be surprised to see Benjamin Netanyahu as part of the 10-nation confab destroying Israel, since he is a formidable accomplice to the destruction of his country. Although Netanyahu is on the ropes and may not survive because of him losing factions and already a cobbled together government, he is a better fit than any of the last three on this list that I have provided to you, and is far more destructive of Israel today than anyone else as their prime minister. I have been holding out on you, however, The 83rd Mizmor of King Dod provides a list of 10 culprits, all of whom emerged to plague Israel in association with the second half of the time of troubles. And while there is some question as to whether he is describing the pedigree of the belligerents who will attack Israel, providing the men and materiel for the ensuing war, which I think is really the intent, or the bonehead political blowhards aiding and abetting Trump. There is likely considerable commonality between these two. Therefore, even before we turn to Daniel 8, which we will cover in its entirety, I'd like to share Psalm 83. If nothing else, it will serve to verify that Dod knew everything that he shared with us here in Daniel for centuries before he wrote about it while king. So now, in addition to knowing that Trump will have a wicked mouth, wild, goatish hair, and will be an old guy with a monstrous ego, as well as a warmonger who will destroy his own country, leaving the world lifeless, we are discovering that Trump is evolving, literally transforming himself before our eyes as he went from 45 to 47, from a narcissist to a psychopath, from a man who couldn't control his mouth to a complete confabulator. There was none of the chaos that flows prolifically from his core today 4 years ago. And at the time, not only was his vitriol in check with the prospect of a second term, Trump was resolutely anti-Islam and pro-Israel in his first term. Yeah, but not now. Well, I've shared this previously. It's apparent that after losing the election, encouraging the insurrection that followed, being relentlessly sued for sexual, ethical, and political crimes, and consistently losing every case, Trump made a deal with the devil. And he did so to return to power and to avoid spending the rest of his life bankrupt and in jail. And demon possession had a transformative influence on the man, radically changing his demeanor, his allegiances, and his adversaries. His is the most rapid deterioration of decorum and decency ever witnessed for a head of state. He is no longer sane and says some of the dumbest things we have ever heard. The only reason he's not held accountable is each day as somebody says, "Oh my God, that was unbelievably stupid and completely inaccurate," he doubles down and says something even dumber the next day, and they forget what he said the previous day and move to the next day, which is then offset by the chaos of the following day. I mean, it's hard to lambaste Trump for lying about forming a deal with China, which he never did, lying about forming a deal with Japan that he never did, lying about forming a deal with Mexico, which he didn't do, lying about solving the Pakistani Indian war, which he did not do, about forming a deal with the EU that had the EU giving the U.S. hundreds of billions of dollars, which he did not do. Because, well, every day there's a new catastrophe and a new confabulation, and which people just lose track of what happened the previous day. He does a meltdown over all manner of things, including his obvious participation and guilt related to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this brings us back to speculating which of the 10 politicians that Trump will disparage. And that's a tough call because he will slander all of them except MBS and Al-Thani. However, if asked to pick those most likely to enter a confrontation with him, challenging him, and thereby engendering his wrath, or just being too wimpy to survive in his presence, we would consider Macron, Starmer, Maloney, and Carney, as well as Sisi in that mix, with Netanyahu being lead among them if included in the Big Ten Conference. The overt demeaning of three of those originally supporting him is yet another affirmation that the devil's advocate is Donald to the dumpster. He got his lawyer, Cohen, thrown in jail. He all but murdered Zelensky, who was running his proxy war, and he lambasted Musk, who was his biggest contributor and the man responsible for him not being in jail and being in the White House instead. No one turns allies into enemies or devours them faster or more ruthlessly than Donald Trump. He is the Hannibal Lecter of politics. And let's not forget, the single most revealing identifier that the man who betrays Israel by sponsoring the two-state solution, winning the Nobel Prize as a result of starting World War III, is our guy. We recognize that Trump's Islamic State confab, which is headed by Macron and MBS currently, is scheduled to resume in New York City in September of this year, 2025. And the prophets are clear, both here in Daniel and again in Isaiah, that the man who sponsors the destruction of Israel by carving out a foreign state, a terrorist state from its midst, is the Towrahless one known as the Antichrist. Now, getting down to business while following in Paul's footsteps and fulfilling the prophecies regarding him in Isaiah 14, which is the presentation of Satan and his desire to be a god, or at least the Son of God. We read, "And he will speak, issuing decisions, decrees, and commands. He will talk about his endeavors, his ambitions, and affairs, all in conflict with and in opposition to the Most High. His way of speaking and proclamations will wear down and torment, even oppress and persecute the set apart of the Almighty. Then he will aspire to change, attempting to alter the set times for the meetings, along with the written and codified prescriptions. They will be controlled and influenced by him as they are claimed under his authority, up to 3.5 years. Daniel 7:25. Donald Trump has issued well over 200 executive orders. He is governing by executive order because, quite frankly, he doesn't play well with others, and all he can do is pretend to be a king. He speaks every day about his decrees and his commands, trying to project his will on others, and yet everything he says is in conflict with and in opposition to the Most High. His way of speaking and his proclamations have worn everyone down. They have oppressed and persecuted people the world over. And ultimately, his primary target is going to be Satan's, and that is Israel. And you might think that he has been supportive of Israel. For example, he is saying that Israel can do whatever it wants to in Gaza. It's because he knows that Netanyahu doing what he wants to do in Gaza makes it exceedingly easy for him to do what he has been bribed to do relative to the Fakistanian state. Impose it. The world will be almost unanimous in support. It does say here that he is going to aspire to change and alter the set times for the meetings. We learn about this in the book of Ezekiel, where Satan, as the inspiration of that book, tells us that he's going to eliminate all, 6 of Yahweh's 7 Moed Mikre. And the one that he is going to retain, Passover, is going to change dates. And it's be separated from matzah, which makes it diabolical. To celebrate Passover, as rabbis do, without integrating it into chag matzah, is actually a prescription for Sheol, because it makes the soul immortal but unperfected, and the only result there is to be sent to Sheol, eternal separation. And he is going to do that, but he is going to add his own celebrations. It'll be No Moon Day. He doesn't like me very much. He will have Do Nothing Day. That's in honor of the rabbis. And he will have All Ignorance Day. I've got to give the Muslims a bone. And the most important feast that he will impose is called the Feast of the Beast. And that is where he has the opportunity to kill the final sacrifice, the Adamah Parah, tear out its heart, eat it, and drink its blood. He will be a cannibal. And it says that he's going to be controlling and influencing Israel. And they will be under his authority. And that is the way that it looks, because there's only one nation right now where Donald Trump has a majority approval rating. And I think it's in the 60 percentile, where its approval rating around the world is in the low teens, and in the United States in the low 30s. But his approval rating is in the 60s in Israel. And so he will have influence there. And he's going to have, his influence is up to 3.5 years. And this is because he won't set up shop in Israel until January 29th of 2030. And he will stay entrenched in Israel, making this change relative to the Moed Mikre 45 days later on the Ides of March 15th of 2030. And he will commit the ultimate crime on Towrah, September 24th of 2033, year 6000 Yah, at which time he will be fully recompensed 7 times over for all of the harm he has caused God's people prior to being sent to hell. So there's only one individual of whom the prophets spoke, who they foretold would become the best known individual for positioning himself against the Most High. Now, in terms of spirits, this individual's name is Halal ben Shakar, and he is Hasatan, the adversary. His profile is presented in Yeshaya Isaiah 14, which is halfway between the portrait of the Choder in Isaiah 11, who is equipped with the 7 spirits of Yahweh to stand up against him, and Isaiah 17, which frames all of these events that have been foretold here in Daniel 7, putting them in the context of place and time. Therefore, after the completion of our review of Daniel 8 and 9, well, I think after 8, then we'll go into 9. I'm going to turn to Yeshaya in the 14th chapter, and I'm going to review all of it with you so you have a better idea of exactly who we're dealing with here that is going to demon possess, or has already now demon possessed Donald Trump. For now, it's germane to derive a proper interpretation of this narrative, to realize that the man we are identifying with Donald Trump is, in fact, the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan. He isn't just demon-possessed, as was the case of Paul and Muhammad. He is actually the corporeal manifestation of Satan. Therefore, this will be the ultimate showdown, because he's up against the Choder, who is imbued with the Ruach of Yahweh. And so the denizen of the devil with the spirit of Satan is going to do his utmost to determine who governs the planet henceforth, and his primary adversary standing in his way will be Yahweh's Choder. Now, in this regard, you might be taken aback by the realization that Yahweh prevails in part by having Satan take the mortality of the Choder, of the Adam of Parah in the end. But this is as it must be. A man must be shown willing to serve Yahweh and his people, Yehudim, to the extent he will trust God to make a powerful example of his unwavering devotion. No greater love than this, which is why Dode has already served as the Passover lamb. Now, this actually goes back to the test of the covenant in year 2000 Yah, precisely 4,000 years prior to this occurrence. It was then on Moriah, as it will be again, that Yahweh evaluated Abraham's commitment to him by asking Abraham to offer what was dearest to him, his beloved son. Having made the point, explained the purpose of Pesach, our Heavenly Father intervened and said that he would provide the lamb. This meant that he would arrange for his beloved firstborn son to offer his Bashar body, which Dode did when he fulfilled Passover on Mount Moriah in year 4,000 Yah, 2,000 years later, 40 Yobel. So now in year 6,000 Yah, the Bashar herald is being afforded the same opportunity to prove that love and life are worth the sacrifice. That Yahweh and Yehudim are worthy of our respect and trust. And so by relying on God with my soul, I will surrender my body to affirm way more powerfully than all of the words I have spoken that I trust him. And so should you. And in the process, I will actually earn the respect of my king and of his people, such that I will be able to serve the king and lead Israel. Now, before we begin to unpack the insights attributable to the second of four sentences in this proclamation, realize that the initial statement serves as further affirmation that I was correct in my earlier assessment. The appalling abomination is nothing less than the adversary's apostle claiming that Satan is God and that he will make many other infuriating pronouncements when he speaks on the Ides of March in 2030. And we're going to hear Satan say what is encapsulated in Allahu Akbar. Allah is greater than Yahweh. Although his primary target is Elyon, who is Dode. All things pertaining to the very hand of God. Also, we should expect that the Antichrist figure will replicate the tactics deployed by Paul and more crudely by Muhammad after him. He will misappropriate citations and narratives from the Torah wa Nabi. Trump is perfect for misrepresenting things and perverting them for his purpose. And very little is more aggravating to the Almighty than having the religious misquote him to advance their demonic delusions. Once again, since Yahweh refers to Israel as being set apart unto him, it is the surviving remnant here now of Israel whom the divine Donald will speak against, tormenting and oppressing Jews. God's people will be persecuted by the man they once adored. They're going to perceive him as the second coming of Cyrus, as a modern-day Messiah. Of course, this will largely be their fault as they continue to be wrong about God while placing their trust in all the wrong people. I've been warning all who will listen on social media, on X, Facebook, and YouTube, even Rumble, that Trump is the great betrayer. Been doing it now for 8 months. And that they are embracing far worse than what Neville Chamberlain did. Just as Satan will rip my heart out on Towrah, Trump's going to do the same to Israel on or before Shabuah. To a real extent, Israel will be living out the horrors of Ezekiel, not only with its 25 ways to torment and kill Jews, but with the abusive and repetitive rapes of the daughters of Zion in the book. And speaking of what Ezekiel portends, the denizen of the devil will aspire to alter the set appointments that Yahweh has codified as his prescriptions for living. Only Passover will remain, and it will be repositioned to fit the Roman Holy Week of Easter. And it will coincide with Ashura Day. He will then add All Stupid Day, No Moon Day, and the Feast of the Beast. And on the latter, as I have shared, he will take the Roman Catholic Eucharist with its insistence on eating the flesh of their Christ and drinking his blood to a new level of cannibalistic barbarism, when bludgeoning the anima pura to death with the intent of perpetrating his gruesome ritual. It's the very one that will portend his demise. Therefore, it appears that my analysis of Ezekiel and the substitute festivals of the devil's advocate are being affirmed right here. His 4 holidays will begin with the repurposing and retiming of Passover, overlapping it with Easter, Ashura Day, and Imperial Rome's Holy Week. All other moed will be cast aside, particularly Shabuah, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah, so that he can substitute his own gaudy galas. This will transpire over the 3.5-year period previously specified, commencing on the Ides of March in 2030, ending on Yom Teruah in 2033. The world influenced by Trump and company will be on one calendar, while the covenant family remains on another. The fate of souls will hinge largely upon which they decide to honor. This begins to a period that introduces an unexpected twist for many, albeit not for those who understand Satan's style. You see, the devil, like his apostle Paul, prevails through clever counterfeits rather than creative ingenuity. A counterfeit is worthless, even illegal, and yet the best efforts of crooks are remarkably similar to the genuine article, making the bogus bill appear valuable when it's actually a liability and a crime. In this way, the Towrahless one's decrees will be in conflict with and in opposition to Yahweh's Torah, his guidance. And they will be laid beside the truth forming an effective ruse. This is Paul's ploy throughout his letters, recognizing that by misappropriating, misconstruing, misrepresenting the word of God, the resulting lies are made to appear godly. After all, the Towrahless one wants people the world over to believe that he is God, and as a result, expect religious edicts similar to Christianity, where divine strokes are out of focus, out of context, repositioned, truncated, and elongated, which is the essence of the New Testament. Now, this will be a surprise to many because Christians and Muslims collectively, representing more than half of humanity, have been misled into believing that devil worship includes satanic rituals. But my friends, that couldn't be further from the truth. The last thing Satan wants is to be seen as the adversary. He wants to be worshiped as God. And that is why the Lord is the God of religion. There is also an overture here to replacement theology. Rather than celebrating the Torah, covenant, and moed, while uplifting Yahweh's name and people, the Towrahless one will be doing the opposite. He degrades and disparages things of God, as did Paul, as did Muhammad, as did Allah, while persecuting God's people. Much of this will therefore parallel the Christian New Testament and the Islamic Quran. In particular, Paul's letters besmirch the Torah. They demean those who observe it. He spoke so damningly of Yehudim in his epistles. They have been persecuted by the Christian church ever since. Likewise, Paul sought to nullify Yahweh's meeting times, vilifying the invitations and the Shabat. And so with Yahweh's appointed meeting times discounted, Christians had no issue replacing them with pagan alternatives. In this same way, the Towrahless one of the time of trouble will go beyond, way beyond what Paul began, actually outlawing with the plague of death demand. Therefore, the religion that was born out of disdain for the Torah will die deprived of it. Death in this statement is actually an Aramaic word. It draws its meaning from Persian culture, and yet the Dictionary of Biblical Languages of Aramaic attests that death represents the body. It's a body of known today as the Torah. Additionally, the theological workbook of the Old Testament reveals that death overlaps the use of Torah, mitzvah, misfat, and choke in Hebrew when it appears in the Aramaic sections of Ezra and Daniel. Now, this known, since Daniel was aware of the title and could have written Torah in Aramaic, same vowel consonant sequence, I suspect there is a reason behind the use of death. Just as Paul attacked Yahweh's Torah by referring to it as a nomo and nomu in Greek, when he knew the title and could have transliterated it, Daniel is conveying the terminology the Towrahless one will deploy when denouncing God's Torah guidance. So once again, we have been told that the adversary will be just like his famed Apostle Paul. He will not only be in opposition to the Torah and its appointed meeting times, outlawing them, he's going to harass Yahweh's set-apart ones, just as Paul attacked the Judaizers. The testimony, actions, ambitions, claims, and strategy of these men will be essentially indistinguishable. If you want to know this blowhard, this bonehead, this horn, and how he will act, and what he will say, read Paul's letter to the Galatians, followed by his ode on behalf of the Romans, Paul's tribute to this very monster. And I would encourage you to do so in Twistianity. There are 5 volumes. They're all free for you on the bookshelf of either goddamnreligion.org or yadayah.com. The concluding part of this statement, time, times, and half a time, is 3.5 years. It means that the beast will only be allowed to implement his contrarian agenda beginning around the time of Passover in 2030. And as we know, beginning on the Ides of March, the 15th of March in 2030 of that year. It'll be a Friday, of course, the Muslim day of prayer. And in this regard, I think Satan has been programmed to do as he has done. Now, that's a radical thought, but I think Yahweh, when he said in Yashayah that he created evil, meant what he said, and that he created and programmed Hasatan for this very purpose, and he will carry out his programming to the end. And in this regard, I think that he will continue to do these things all the way through Towrah in year 6,000 Yah. God wanted, in fact, needed there to be an alternative to him, that those who preferred faith to knowing, religion to relationship, could choose the options that lead away from God. So I do not think that there will be any hesitation on Satan's part throughout this process. He knows what God has offered in terms of the dates and the things he will fulfill. He laid them all out in Ezekiel for us. But he's going to do exactly as programmed. Now, in this case, the 6,000-year human experience outside the protection of the garden is drawing to a close. And Yahweh wants everyone still living on the earth to decide if they want to ally with the Lord or him as God. Therefore, just like Satan was given access to Eden and to its inhabitants 6,000 years ago, and allowed to convolute Yahweh's message, we're going to witness the same process play out again, and very soon. Doing this 3.5 years, during this time, mortal men and women will be afforded this one last opportunity to choose to participate in the covenant in accordance with its terms and conditions, and they will be benefited by the testimony of Elia and Yada at this time from the Temple Mount. And they have the option to accept what the adversary is advocating as well. And he's going to make, well, the kind of case Donald Trump makes. And there are a lot of people who believe him. This referendum on life, however, will not linger forever. So just as Adam and Chawah could not come and go from Gan Eden, the millennial Shabat, it's not going to have a revolting door. Similarly, since eternity is forever, there will be no opting out once Yahweh destroys the existing universe and creates a new one. Therefore, God has to be assured that everyone as a living soul who has entered this time has made a final decision, and that choice is genuine and appropriate. So I will share this next statement with you, and we will conclude this program here. It speaks of a man who will sit in judgment, exercising the authority of a king and rendering justice, continuing to do so well into the future. His first order of business will be to judge and condemn Donald Trump, the Towrahless one. In essence, throwing the bronze man, this copper confabulator, and his lord, Satan, into Sheol after first making sure that the proper recompense has been provided 7 times what they have done. And since in these last nearly 7 years, they will cause the deaths of billions of people and millions of Jews, the penalty will be very high. So the copper confabulator, this bronze man, is a reference from Ezekiel, as I have shared, where the Lord's accomplice in the end is a copper-colored individual like Trump. In fact, fourth only to his goatish hair, his big mouth, and his decrepit appearance as a very old man, the exceedingly odd, almost unhuman copperish bronze coloration of Donald Trump's face is among his most distinguishing features. And what's particularly revealing about Satan's bronze boy in the last quarter of the book is that he is doing what Trump relishes. He is scheming to build the largest and most imposing, grandiose and gaudy, monstrously large building bearing his name in the most coveted of locations, on top of the Temple Mount, covering all of Jerusalem and much of Judea. The bronze measure man's fixation on the absurdly gargantuan proportions of Ezekiel's temple, as if he was a real estate developer, was Satan's adroit depiction of his accomplice. And it is the Coppercon who replaces Ezekiel in the end, becoming Satan's corporeal manifestation, especially at the time the replacement meetings, these change dates, are instituted. And so now you know why Yahweh insisted that I not only rebuke the book of Ezekiel, but go one step behind where no one has tread before to attribute it directly to Hasatan. Now, these things known, the subject of these next 2 sentences is most adroitly identified by recognizing that when the second verb, ada, was conveyed using the Aramaic hafel stem, which is akin to the Hebrew hifel, and in the imperfect conjugation with the object being his governmental authority, the otherwise unidentified he is the one judging and convicting the copper confabulator. With this stem, the subject is causing the guilty party to suffer the consequence of his egregious crimes against God's people. And therefore, he is the old guy who intervenes in the 22nd verse to save the remnant of Yisrael from the Donald dumpster. Therefore, the one explaining this to Daniel, who is either Gabriel Dod, Michael Yada, or Elijah, is fully cognizant of what will transpire next. And so he reports. Then he will resolve disputes, sitting in judgment, while retaining the ongoing authority of the king to decide. So he will take away, remove, and repeal, then annul his governmental authority and his mastery, terminated and eradicated, to vanish, ceasing to exist, and perishing, all by the restoring witness in the end of time. Daniel 7:26. I can't wait to dissect this for you and return and analyze it for you so you have a full grasp of this marvelous prophecy, which for the very first time in 2,600 years is being explained in a way that every nuance nuance of it can be known and appreciated, so that you know exactly who is going to do what, when, and where. So I thank you for listening. I am Yada. This has been a special episode of the YAHOWAH blog. Good day.